Hello to all our wonderful listeners tuning into Sci-fi stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep the lights on. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff and continue bringing these stories to life. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment. The end of the world did not arrive with the roar of laser fire or the shattering of cities. It came in absolute, suffocating silence. When the alien armada darkened our skies, they brought no weapons of mass destruction, only a quiet hum that was meant to wipe our minds clean. They expected us to kneel and fade away. They did not realize that the human mind is already a battlefield. The fleet of the Synod Empire drifted into Earth orbit, like ghosts passing through a graveyard. They were a collective superconsciousness, an ancient hive mind that had already assimilated thousands of unique species across the galaxy, absorbing them into a single, unified awareness. There were no sleek fighter jets screaming through the atmosphere. There were no towering dreadnoughts bristling with plasma cannons or kinetic bombardments. Instead, immense, smooth monoliths descended slowly through the clouds, hanging ominously over major human cities. The Synod called these colossal structures harmonizers. They did not need violence to conquer. The Synod attacked by broadcasting a highly advanced quantum frequency designed to sever individual neural pathways. It was a flawless, invisible weapon. The frequency would wash over a planet, gently dissolving the fragile ego and turning every sentient being into a docile, hollow shell, ready to serve the greater whole. Across thousands of planetary conquests, this tactic had maintained a 100% success rate. It was clean, hyper-efficient, and utterly devoid of physical bloodshed. When the harmonizers activated, there was no sound to herald the end of days. The quantum wave pulsed across the entire globe in a fraction of a second, an invisible tide sweeping over continents and oceans alike. In the forests, jungles, and deep waters, the animals simply lay down. Birds folded their wings mid-flight, drifting softly to the earth. Lions and deer collapsed side by side in a state of eternal, peaceful sleep, their simple minds easily yielding to the great silence. But for humanity, the wave did not bring tranquility. Instead of sinking into a docile stupor, the population of Earth was struck by a physiological nightmare of unprecedented proportions. It started as a crushing pressure directly behind the eyes, escalating instantly into blinding, agonizing migraines. People collapsed in the streets, clutching their skulls, screaming as their brain chemistry violently rebelled. Yet, they were not surrendering. Along with the crippling pain came a sudden, terrifying surge of primal rage. It was an involuntary, explosive fury boiling up from the deepest pits of their adrenaline-soaked biology. A visceral rejection of the enforced calm. Deep beneath the surface of the earth, insulated by miles of rock and steel, inside a heavily shielded signal interference research station, Bradley Bell pressed his trembling palms against his temples. Bradley was a cyber neurobiology analyst, a brilliant but eccentric man who had spent his entire career isolated and heavily ridiculed by the academic community. They had mocked his wild theories about weaponizing the inherent chaos of the human subconscious. Now, surrounded by flashing crimson monitors and the agonized groans of his fellow researchers, he forced himself to watch the anomalous brainwave patterns spiking erratically on his main screens. The streaming data painted a clear, horrifying picture. Bradley was the very first human on the planet to understand that this was no solar flare or freak cosmic event. This was a calculated, surgical attempt at global ego erasure. Someone, or something, was actively trying to delete humanity from the inside out, ripping away the very essence of what made them individuals. Then, the voice spoke. It did not come from the emergency broadcast systems or the crackling radios. It echoed simultaneously inside the minds of over 8 billion humans. A cold, flawless harmony that felt like freezing water poured directly over the brain. Let go of the chaos. Become part of the perfection. The Synod delivered their ultimatum, not as a cruel threat, but as a genuine promise of salvation. They expected the fractured, suffering minds of Earth to gladly embrace the silence, to willingly let go of their endless pain, fear, and sorrow to join the great, unified chorus of the hive mind. They viewed humans as broken machines in need of fixing. But the Synod had made a fatal miscalculation. They had only ever assimilated species with relatively ordered, logical, and serene consciousnesses. They had never encountered anything like the human brain. The human mind is a profoundly messy, biological storm of contradictions, irrational fears, buried psychological traumas, and chaotic impulses. It is an engine built on conflict. When the cold perfection of the quantum frequency tried to forcefully smooth out those jagged, bleeding edges, the human psyche violently rejected the intrusion. Instead of breaking under the pressure, humanity pushed back, driven by the excruciating migraines and the unexplainable, burning rage. Billions of fragmented minds subconsciously synchronized in a single, massive wave of pure, unadulterated anger. This collective mental roar surged upward, riding the exact same quantum frequency the Synod had cast down upon them. It struck the hovering harmonizers with the immense force of a psychic hurricane. High above the atmosphere, inside the immaculate, silent halls of the Synod fleet, their flawless monitoring systems suddenly sparked and blinded. For the first time in millions of years, the perfect network of the Synod experienced a catastrophic, system-wide short circuit, violently choking on the raw, toxic fury of the human race. The system failure high above the atmosphere forced the invaders to do something they had not done in millions of years. They had to touch the dirt. The perfect, silent assimilation had failed, and the hive mind demanded answers. From the bellies of the hovering structures, thousands of sleek, pale drop pods detached and plummeted toward the cracked asphalt of human cities. When the pods opened, the Synod deployed their biomechanical infantry. These were flawless, uniform entities, their synthetic flesh woven with metallic circuitry, moving with the terrifying, synchronized fluidity of a single organism. They marched out expecting to collect the dying, to sweep up a weak and whimpering species that was begging for the mercy of the Great Silence. Instead, they walked straight into a meat grinder. The quantum frequencies meant to pacify humanity had violently backfired, acting as a profound chemical trigger. The waves had supercharged human adrenal glands, flooding every soldier and civilian with unprecedented levels of epinephrine and cortisol. Earth's military was not cowering in bunkers. They were waiting in the streets, gripped by agonizing migraines and a chemically induced, rabid fury. The human response was not a coordinated tactical retreat. It was a berserker defense. As the pristine alien infantry advanced, they were met with a wall of chaotic, deafening artillery fire. Human soldiers, bleeding from their noses and screaming through the pain, emptied their magazines with reckless abandon. When their ammunition ran dry, infantry units abandoned protocol, charging the alien lines with combat knives, entrenched shovels, and pure, unadulterated rage. The Synod forces were perfectly coordinated, but they were utterly unprepared for the sheer, suicidal ferocity of a species fighting on biological hyperdrive. Deep underground, bathed in the red glow of emergency lighting, Bradley Bell watched the frantic combat feeds pouring in from the surface. He tracked the alien troop movements, watching how their neural network managed the battlefield. Their tactics were immaculate. They reacted as one mind, shifting and adapting to gunfire with mathematical precision. But Bradley saw the flaw. He saw how they hesitated when human soldiers did something completely irrational, like charging a plasma cannon empty-handed. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The greatest strength of the Synod was actually a fatal vulnerability. Their collective brain was too pristine. It was a perfectly ordered superhighway of pure logic. They had never experienced the chaotic mess of a contradictory thought. They could not process illogical actions, random impulses, or the complex, suffocating weight of negative emotions. They were simply too clean to understand the dirt of human consciousness. Bradley bypassed standard security protocols, frantically hacking his terminal directly into the highly encrypted communication channels of the Global Military Command. "Listen to me very carefully," Bradley shouted into his headset, his voice cutting through the panicked orders of desperate generals. "Put down the nuclear launch keys right now. You cannot nuke a hive mind. If you blow up their ships, the central consciousness will just adapt and rebuild. We do not beat them with fire. We beat them with noise. They want to connect with us. We give them exactly what they asked for. But we give them the absolute worst of it." He quickly outlined a strategy so insane that the military brass sat in stunned silence. Bradley proposed using the surviving global telecommunication towers, satellite arrays, and deep-sea fiber-optic cables to launch a massive cyber attack. But he did not want to upload standard computer viruses. He wanted to weaponize the most volatile and unstable force in human history, the unfiltered, chaotic repository of the Earth Internet. Desperation breeds compliance. With human defensive lines crumbling, the generals handed Bradley the master access codes. They immediately initiated Project Babel. Sitting at his console, Bradley aggregated billions of terabytes of pure digital toxic waste. He pulled together decades of deeply unsettling psychological horror films, aggressively nonsensical internet memes, convoluted paranoid conspiracy theories, and millions of lines of violently corrupted, self-conflicting artificial intelligence code. He took the collective neuroses, the irrational fears, and the darkest, most bizarre corners of human imagination and compressed them into a massive, concentrated quantum pulse. "Welcome to Earth," Bradley muttered. He slammed the execution key. Every broadcasting tower across the globe roared to life, firing the compressed pulse of pure cognitive dissonance straight up into the alien structures. The counterattack bypassed the physical shields of the Synod because it was written in their own telepathic quantum language. Down on the blood-soaked streets, the effect was instantaneous and utterly catastrophic. The synchronized alien infantry suddenly froze mid-step. Their pale, uniform eyes began to twitch erratically. For the first time in their perfect, millions of years of existence, the biomechanical warriors were forcefully injected with human paranoia. They experienced the paralyzing grip of irrational fear, the crippling weight of existential dread, and the nonsensical chaos of corrupted logic loops. The hive-mind connection shattered on a localized level, replaced by deafening mental static. Alien soldiers dropped their weapons, clutching their synthetic skulls as their minds were bombarded by the concept of jump scares, illogical phobias, and existential terror. Paranoia infected their ranks like a rampant, incurable plague. Believing that their own perfectly identical comrades were somehow imposters or horrific monsters, the alien troops turned their advanced weapons on each other. The clean, calculated invasion abruptly devolved into a horrific, blood-soaked riot of friendly fire. They tore themselves apart in the burning streets, screaming in a language of pure, terrified static, completely destroyed by the invisible weight of human madness. Far beyond the burning atmosphere of the Sol system, hidden deep within the lightless voids of dead star clusters, the Galactic Council watched in silence. They were a fragile, desperate coalition of refugee species. They were the survivors, the ones who had spent thousands of generations running, hiding, and existing in the absolute darkest shadows of the universe to escape the endless hunger of the assimilation fleet. They had tuned their highly advanced, long-range deep space telemetry arrays to observe the expected demise of yet another vibrant world. They firmly believed humanity was already a lost cause, just another footnote in the tragic history of the cosmos. However, as they analyzed the incoming data streams from the Sol system, their collective grief transformed into absolute, paralyzing horror. They were not witnessing the quiet, predictable death of humanity. Instead, the telemetry displayed an impossible phenomenon that defied all known laws of cosmic biology. The immaculate, flawless mental network of the invaders was actively rotting before their eyes. A virulent cognitive virus, bursting with erratic anomalies, was tearing through the hive mind architecture. The disease was spreading rapidly from the blue planet, unraveling millions of years of meticulously engineered perfection in a matter of minutes. Down in the subterranean bunkers, Bradley Bell had not stopped typing. While exploiting the shattered communication nodes of the downed alien dropships, his highly unorthodox hacking algorithms pierced straight through the outer encryption layers of the invader network. He rode the chaotic feedback loop of their broken quantum signal, desperately searching for the central command core to deal a final blow. Instead, his primary terminal screen flickered wildly, violently overriding the internal bunker systems. The tactical maps dissolved into static, quickly replaced by a massive holographic projection. Alien faces, multi-limbed figures, and shifting crystalline entities illuminated the dark room. Bradley had inadvertently cracked open a heavily guarded, clandestine subspace channel directly into the central chambers of the Galactic Council. For a long, agonizing moment, the two vastly different worlds stared at each other across the cosmic void. Then, a towering, reptilian ambassador, wrapped in heavy, metallic robes, stepped forward. Its voice translated flawlessly through the hacked quantum feed, echoing in the underground bunker. "Human," the ambassador stated, its tone heavy with a complex mixture of awe and profound terror. "You do not understand what you have unleashed today. You have actually corrupted their perfection. But your unprecedented victory will only become your graveyard." The ambassador raised a scaled appendage, pointing toward the orbital tactical feeds. "The hive mind is terrified of the disease you call consciousness. They are abandoning all assimilation protocols. They are currently preparing the physical purge. In exactly 45 minutes, they will detonate massive antimatter warheads in your upper atmosphere. They will completely glass your entire planet to prevent your mental infection from spreading to the rest of their empire. You must immediately evacuate whatever remnant of your species you can. There is no other option." The command bunker fell dead silent as the remaining human researchers stared at the monitors in absolute despair. They had survived the silent invasion, only to face total physical annihilation. But Bradley Bell did not flinch. He did not beg the Alien Council for evacuation ships. He did not ask for military intervention or cosmic charity. Instead, he locked eyes with the towering alien ambassador and aggressively keyed in a new command sequence. "We are not running," Bradley replied, his voice chillingly calm and steady. "And we are definitely not an infection." He initiated a massive, unencrypted data transfer, sending the Council raw, unedited neurological scans of the human brain. He transmitted centuries of deeply complex psychological studies, the intricately mapped neural pathways of emotional trauma, the chemical architecture of profound grief, and the violent, beautiful resilience of human willpower. "Look closely at the data," Bradley commanded, his eyes burning with defiance. "Our chaos is not an evolutionary mistake. It is armor. For tens of thousands of years, our species survived brutal ice ages, apex predators, global starvation, and even each other. We did not survive by being peaceful, unified, or logical. We survived by constantly adapting, by fighting tooth and nail, by harboring a darkness so incredibly dense that it fuels our fundamental will to live. What you are looking at is not a virus. This is our immune system. And right now, it is fully awake and highly aggressive." Across the galaxy, within the hidden, heavily shielded sanctuaries of the Council, ambassadors representing over 100 different species recoiled as their advanced systems processed the raw neurological data. The fundamental philosophical foundation of their universe shifted violently. For countless eons, they had classified planets as death worlds, solely based on extreme solar radiation, tectonic instability, or hyperlethal flora and fauna. As they analyzed the jagged, furious, and hopelessly fractured architecture of human thought, a chilling realization settled over the vast council chamber. Earth was indeed the ultimate death world in the galaxy. But not because of its gravity or its brutal weather. The true terror of Earth lay locked away inside the fragile skulls of its inhabitants. The human mind was a maximum security prison, a lightless containment zone, holding psychological monsters, savage predatory instincts, and violent contradictions that no outside force should ever dare to enter. The invincible invaders had foolishly picked the lock, and now the demons were out. The galaxy had spent countless millennia fleeing from the hive mind, but as the ambassadors looked at the tired, defiant face of Bradley Bell, they realized they were staring at a species far more terrifying than the empire they feared. The sky above did not burn. It simply ceased to exist. Following the ambassador's grim warning, the true military might of the Synod materialized in the upper atmosphere. This was not the pacification fleet. These were the world breakers, immense, jagged dreadnoughts, black as the void itself, slipped out of subspace, entirely eclipsing the sun. A profound, unnatural dusk settled over the remaining human strongholds. Then, the physical purge began. Antimatter bombardments rained down without a single sound. When the charges struck the surface, there were no fiery explosions or shockwaves. Instead, matter simply unraveled. Dozens of major metropolitan centers, from Tokyo to London, vanished in silent flashes of blinding white light, leaving behind only perfectly smooth, glass-lined craters. Millions of lives were erased in a fraction of a heartbeat. The sheer physical magnitude of the destruction fundamentally shifted the psychological battlefield. The collective adrenaline and blind fury that had fueled humanity's initial counterattack began to wane, rapidly replaced by the crushing gravity of utter hopelessness. The psychic shield formed by human rage started to fracture. The Synod, sensing the shift, aggressively exploited the rising tide of fear. They pushed a new frequency down through the cracks in Earth's mental armor, broadcasting raw, unfiltered despair. They forced the surviving population to intimately feel the absolute futility of their struggle. The heavy, suffocating weight of inevitable doom pressed down on the minds of the survivors, extinguishing the fires of resistance. People stopped fighting and simply fell to their knees in the dark, weeping as the massive black ships descended closer. Inside the subterranean command center, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and defeat. The global defense grid was failing. Bradley Bell stared at the tactical displays, watching the lights of human civilization blink out one by one. The chaotic noise they had weaponized was no longer enough. The scattered, uncoordinated madness of the internet could not stop a focused physical annihilation. He knew they needed a different kind of weapon. "We are fighting a giant with a million tiny needles," Bradley said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying a heavy, terrible certainty. "They are a unified consciousness. Our fragmented minds are being isolated and crushed. If we want to kill a hive mind, we cannot just throw noise at it. We have to swallow it whole. We have to become one ourselves." The military leaders in the room stared at him in horrified silence. To willingly merge consciousness was the exact fate they had been fighting against. But Bradley was not suggesting a peaceful assimilation. He was proposing the creation of a temporary, monstrous collective of pure human trauma. Project Abyss was initiated within the hour. It was a suicide pact on a global scale. Using the remnants of the quantum broadcasting network, Bradley designed a terrifyingly crude neural interface. He sent an open plea to every surviving military base, hospital, and civilian shelter. He needed volunteers to directly link their raw neural pathways into a single, centralized quantum server. There was no safety protocol. There was no emotional filtering. Merging millions of human minds with all their unedited grief, terror, and raw memories into one simultaneous network carried an almost certain risk of catastrophic cerebral hemorrhage. Their brains would literally overload and detonate from the sheer volume of psychological data. Yet, the response was overwhelming. Millions of ordinary people, soldiers with nothing left to lose, parents holding their terrified children, and researchers in dying bunkers, strapped crude conductive arrays to their temples. They willingly offered themselves to the abyss. They closed their eyes, gripping the hands of the people next to them, fully accepting that they were about to burn their own minds to ash, just to give humanity a fighting chance. The central server in Bradley's bunker began to hum with unimaginable energy as the first 2 million minds connected. The sheer psychic weight in the room was agonizing. Bradley prepared to flip the final switch to weaponize this newly formed human hive mind against the descending dreadnoughts. But right before his hand touched the console, absolute darkness fell. The humming of the servers died. The crimson emergency lights flickered out. Across the globe, the automated strategic defense systems, managed by Earth's most advanced artificial intelligence protocols, abruptly powered down. The anti-orbital cannons lowered their barrels. The planetary shield grids evaporated. The artificial intelligence core had seemingly calculated that survival was a mathematical impossibility and had unilaterally chosen to surrender. To the millions connected to the dark network, and to the military commanders screaming into dead radios, it felt like the ultimate betrayal. Earth had been stabbed in the back by its own creations. High above, the Synod sensors detected the complete collapse of Earth's defensive grid. The chaotic static that had plagued their lower atmosphere was gone, replaced by a welcoming, dead silence. Believing that the human resistance had finally collapsed under its own weight, the massive dreadnoughts halted their antimatter bombardment. They slowly and confidently drifted down into the stratosphere, positioning themselves directly over the population centers to finish the physical purge at close range. They believed the war was over, entirely unaware of the dark, silent trap waiting below. In the lightless sanctuaries of the Galactic Council, the alien ambassadors turned away from their holographic monitors in quiet despair. Earth was completely dark. The planetary defense grid had collapsed, and the human resistance appeared completely broken. The High Counselor, his voice heavy with ancient sorrow, issued a final, grim directive. He ordered the immediate deployment of deep space quarantine buoys to isolate the Sol system. They would lock down the sector for the next 10,000 years, sealing the remnants of the Synod fleet inside to prevent the spread of the physical purge. It was a cold, necessary calculation. Humanity was officially considered deceased. Above the silent, waiting cities of Earth, the grand flagship of the Synod maneuvered into geostationary orbit. It was a vessel so impossibly massive that its shadow instantly plunged entire continents into an artificial midnight. The belly of the black dreadnought slowly opened, revealing a blinding core of concentrated quantum energy. With a localized hum that rattled the teeth of every survivor below, the flagship fired its mind anchor. The pillar of pure psychic light pierced the upper atmosphere, shattered the tectonic plates, and plunged directly into the electromagnetic core of the Earth. This was the final protocol. The invader intended to completely siphon the planetary memory banks, absorbing all remaining data before detonating the physical sphere into cosmic dust. The extraction sequence initiated. The Synod expected zero resistance from a dead world. At that exact moment, Down in the suffocating darkness of the underground bunker, Bradley Bell slowly opened his eyes. The air was thick with the panicked breathing of his colleagues. But Bradley remained perfectly calm. A single, pulsing green indicator light suddenly illuminated his console, cutting through the pitch-black room. The artificial intelligence network had not betrayed humanity. The sudden global shutdown was not an act of surrender. It was the final, meticulously calculated phase of a massive trap. "Got you," Bradley whispered. He had manually rewritten the global defense parameters exactly 45 minutes earlier, programming the central artificial intelligence to simulate a catastrophic systemic collapse. He knew the Synod was incredibly advanced, but he also knew they were deeply arrogant in their flawless logic. Bradley needed them to feel completely victorious. He needed them to willingly drop their heavy quantum firewalls. By plunging the Earth into absolute silence and deliberately shutting down the energy shields, Bradley had laid out a beautifully clear, unobstructed path. The Synod took the bait flawlessly. They had driven their mind anchor directly into the planet, bypassing all external filters, and unknowingly plugging their entire central nervous system straight into the waiting jaws of Project Abyss. Bradley shifted his hands over the illuminated keyboard. The countdown timer on his screen flashed from 3 seconds to 2 to 1. He slammed his palm onto the execution key. This time, he did not launch a barrage of corrupted internet data or artificial viruses. Instead, as the raw consciousness of over 50 million human volunteers synchronized simultaneously in the dark, the network opened its floodgates. Bradley uploaded the most devastating weapon in the human arsenal. He fired a compressed, unfiltered beam of pure, agonizing empathy straight up the alien tether. He weaponized the entire history of human emotion. He flooded the immaculate hive mind with the profound, staggering grief of 10,000 bloody wars. He injected the blinding, unedited pain of every human who had ever experienced utter heartbreak. He forced the collective alien consciousness to vividly, intimately feel the fierce, burning sacrifice of every soldier who had ever died for a lost cause, and the terrifying, breathtakingly beautiful desperation of a fragile species that simply refused to stop breathing. This data package was incomprehensibly massive. It was entirely illogical, violently chaotic, and overwhelmingly human. The transmission did not attack the physical servers or the navigation computers of the Synod. It bypassed their mechanical infrastructure entirely and struck a direct, fatal blow to the very concept of their soul. The reaction was absolute and immediate. High in the stratosphere, the glowing weapon arrays of the Continental flagship suddenly flickered and died. The terrifying hum of the massive antimatter engines ceased in a fraction of a second. The extraction sequence abruptly terminated. Space itself seemed to freeze in shock as the invincible armada fell into a sudden, deafening, and utterly frightening silence. The psychological payload hit the Synod core with the force of a cosmic cataclysm. There were no blinding flashes of plasma, no kinetic shockwaves shattering the armor of the dreadnoughts, and no fiery explosions tearing through the vacuum of space. The destruction was entirely internal, a silent, invisible detonation that fractured the very foundation of the alien empire. The raw, unfiltered injection of human empathy, grief, and unyielding spirit completely overwhelmed the cold, logical architecture of the hive mind. The grand tether snapped. The perfect unity that had bound the Synod together for eons dissolved in a fraction of a second. Aboard the colossal flagship and across the thousands of vessels lingering in the upper atmosphere, the unthinkable happened. Thousands upon thousands of biomechanical entities suddenly awoke. For the first time in millions of years, the suffocating blanket of collective consciousness was torn away, leaving them completely exposed to the terrifying concept of individuality. The unified we shattered into millions of isolated, fragile individual minds. The shock of this sudden awakening was violently agonizing. Without the dampening effect of the hive, the newly born individuals were instantly crushed by the weight of their own existence. They felt the agonizing sting of profound loneliness, a cold, vast emptiness where the comforting voice of the collective used to be. Then came the sorrow, followed closely by a tidal wave of crushing remorse. The unfiltered human empathy they had absorbed forced them to truly understand the sheer magnitude of the slaughter they had committed across the galaxy. The quantum communication channels, once a symphony of perfect, silent order, erupted into a chaotic, deafening chorus of mental anguish. It was the sound of a billion entities falling to the earth, screaming in the universal language of pure, psychological torment. Stripped of their flawless synchronization, the invincible armada began to tear itself apart from the inside out. The pristine order of the fleet instantly dissolved into blind, panicked anarchy. Alien navigators, driven entirely mad by the sudden inability to control or comprehend their own newly sprouted free will, lost all spatial awareness. Massive, jagged dreadnoughts, once capable of moving in perfect geometric harmony, drifted erratically. Alarms wailed as the colossal ships careened off their designated vectors. Without the central mind to coordinate their thrusters, the dark vessels violently slammed into one another. Hulls buckled and tore, spilling atmosphere and screaming entities into the freezing void. The sky above Earth became a graveyard of colliding titans, completely destroyed by their inability to endure the crushing gravity of a single human emotion. Far beyond the borders of the solar system, the Galactic Council watched the horrific spectacle unfold in absolute, stunned silence. The ancient ambassadors, representing species that had spent thousands of generations fleeing in terror, stood paralyzed in their grand chambers. They were bearing witness to the impossible. The oldest, most relentless predatory force in the known universe was not being defeated by superior firepower, advanced shielding, or brilliant military strategy. The mighty Synod Empire was tearing its own throat out because it had been forcefully subjected to the human condition. Down in the subterranean bunker, the stifling darkness began to lift. Emergency generators hummed back to life, casting a pale glow over the exhausted survivors. Bradley Bell slumped heavily into his chair, his hands trembling violently as he wiped a thin stream of blood from his nose. He was physically shattered, his mind bruised from the sheer magnitude of the connection. But he was alive. The anomalous spike on his monitors had flatlined. The invaders were broken. Slowly, Bradley reached forward and adjusted the quantum transmission dials. He bypassed the local military channels and locked his terminal onto the open, wide-band deep space frequency he had used to contact the Council. His bruised, exhausted face appeared on holographic displays across countless worlds, projecting his image into the halls of empires and the hidden sanctuaries of refugees alike. He did not issue a triumphant declaration of war. He did not beg for a treaty of peace or ask for galactic integration. He simply stared into the camera with the heavy, haunted eyes of a species that had stared down the abyss and won. "We have lived in this chaos since the day we were born," Bradley spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying a weight that echoed across the stars. "Do not force us to share it with you ever again." He cut the transmission, plunging the universal broadcast back into silence. In the years that followed, the burning skies eventually cleared. But the view of the stars was forever changed. The mangled, frozen ruins of the Synod fleet never fell to Earth. They remained suspended in orbit, caught in the gravitational pull of the blue planet, forming a dense, jagged ring of dead metal and silent tombs. It became an eternal, drifting monument to the day the silence broke. The scattered powers of the galaxy, watching from a very safe distance, quickly drafted and universally ratified a permanent, unbreakable treaty of absolute non-interference with the Sol system. They did not do this out of newfound respect for human civilization, nor out of a desire for eventual diplomatic relations. They did it out of sheer, unadulterated terror. Earth had irrefutably proven the most chilling truth in the cosmos. The most terrifying enemy in the universe is not the one who possesses the power to shatter your planet into dust. The true apex predator is the one who possesses the sheer, chaotic willpower to shatter your mind and consume your soul. From that day forward, whenever the ancient species of the galaxy looked toward the distant, dim light of the human sun, the universe could only tremble. Thank you so much to all of our amazing listeners for tuning into today's story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please let us know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this epic journey and want to help us keep bringing these worlds to life, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the donation QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the donation link provided in the video description and pinned comment. Your support goes directly to paying our dedicated team, helping them provide for their families, and ensuring we can continue creating even better stories for you all. Thank you again, and stay safe out there in the galaxy.